Part 43. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 421. Su Buling was immediately confused. This was different from what he thought. Xiao Qi was clearly seducing him. Wait, does Xiao Qi know that Bao Bao and Aunt Lu are there? Su Buling's eyes were filled with astonishment. He turned around and saw that Xiao Qi was no longer as shy as she had been before when she wanted to refuse and return the greeting. Her dress was half untied, revealing the black belly band and half of the snowballs underneath. Her eyes were full of tears and she hurriedly got up to cover them up. Then he entered Xiao Xiang'er's arms and cried out with a wow dash. Wu, Xiang'er, I can't live anymore. Xiao Xiang'er hugged her frightened sister and glared at Su Buling. You bastard, are you a human? Su Bulenling's eyes widened and he looked at Xiao Qi in disbelief. He didn't expect that Xiao Qi would actually use a beauty trap to lay a surprise for him. Even if he jumped into the Huihe River, he couldn't clean it up. As for that, Aunt Lu, baby, please listen to my explanation. What do you explain? Ms. Lu was so angry that she rushed over and slapped Su Buling on the shoulder a few times. How could you do such a thing? You. She was so angry that her tears rolled down her face. Come out. Su Buling couldn't say that Xiao Qi had seduced him. No one would believe such a funny excuse. He felt so miserable at the moment that he couldn't speak out, so he tried to be calm and apologized. I was impulsive, Aunt Lu, don't cry. Xiao Qi suffered the loss of being mute last time, just to vent her anger. She didn't want to go too far, so she grabbed her angry sister and comforted her softly. Xian'er, that's all. He's still young and can be forgiven for being impulsive. I know he likes me, but I just said it too harshly. Xiao Xiang'er was angry and anxious. Sister, why are you still talking to him? Even if I like you, I can't do such a shameful and angry thing after being rejected. Ms. Lu patted Su Buling's shoulder a few times, then came forward and sniffed. Have you been drinking again? Su Buling couldn't say anything, so he nodded and said, after a day of drinking in a brothel. Are you still going to visit a brothel? Ordinary entertainment. Xiaoting is the host. This Xiaoting, I'm going to find him right now. How dare he make you do this? Ms. Lu felt a little aggrieved in her eyes. She had been with Su Buling for so long. She never believed that Su Buling could do what he just did when he was sober. These words could be regarded as excusing Su Buling. Xiao Xiang'er didn't believe it in her heart, but seeing was believing. She was her own sister next to her, and she was much more angry. She wished she could cut Su Buling off with scissors now. Miss Xiao's face was filled with pear blossoms. She closed her clothes, and said softly with a bit of grievance, that's all, don't spread this matter, so as not to ruin Prince Su's reputation. I don't mind. Su Bulenling spread his hands and held it in for a long time, but he had nothing to say. Last time he bullied Xiao Qi so miserably in the palace, and now Xiao Qi is taking revenge. What else can he do besides suffer the disadvantage of being dumb? Xiao Xiang'er had a pet peeve on both sides, feeling distressed and angry at the same time. Sister, he must be drunk. I'll teach him a lesson when I go back. Don't let your mind wander. She had even taken off half of her clothes just now, and her innocence was completely ruined. Madame Lu was also afraid that Xiao Qi would not be able to think about it, so she hurriedly walked up to her and comforted her. Yes, your child is not like this usually. This time she came to propose marriage sincerely. She must have been impulsive after drinking. You should think about it and don't do anything stupid. Xiao Qi's face gradually recovered and she sighed softly. You don't know my temper yet, so you won't take it to heart. I will consider the marriage proposal. You can go back first. I want to be quiet. When Ms. Lu and Xiao Xiang'er saw this, They couldn't say any more and hurriedly chased Su Buling, who had caused trouble, out of the attic. Su Buling's face was filled with despair. When he saw the cunning look of revenge in Xiao Qi's eyes, an unknown fire arose in his heart. When he walked out of the room, he pinched Xiao Qi's back with his right hand as fast as lightning. "Handle, it's quite powerful." "Wu." Xiao Qi shivered in pain and glared at Su Buling fiercely. Mrs. Lu and Xiang who had no shame to see Xiao Qi, turned around after hearing the sound. Su Buling had already walked out without noticing Su Buling's little move. Xiao Qi didn't dare to say anything. She gritted her teeth and said, "I'm fine, you guys go back first." After Mrs. Lu and Xiang went out, she secretly rubbed the sore spot with her hand. Soon, the three of them left the villa together and headed to Xiajiazhuang not far away. On the narrow path between the willow trees, Mrs. Lu and Xiang couldn't restrain themselves anymore. They were both angry like tigresses. They took turns pinching Su Buling's waist from left to right and said angrily, "Your Majesty, have you lost your mind and gone crazy? Even if you drink, you can't do that kind of thing to Miss Xiao." "Su Buling, that's my sister. Could it be that you got the wrong person? Fortunately, my sister is tough and steady. If she were an ordinary woman, she would just jump into the river, you know. We are here to propose marriage. If you do this to others, they will not dare to marry even if they want to." Su Buletinling's scalp was numb from being pinched and he did not dare to fight back. He could only say helplessly, "Aunt Lu, you still don't believe me, how could I be so unruly? This isn't your first time." Mrs. Lu's eyes widened slightly, her expression stiffened when she realized she had said something wrong, and she didn't even think about explaining it. After all, this matter was much more advantageous than taking advantage of her. Su Buling only felt a headache. "I'm not drunk, so there's no way I could do that kind of thing. I've seen it all." Xiao Xiang was so angry that her teeth itched. She raised her hand and pinched Su Buling's waist again. "You were clearly holding my sister down just now. If Hongluan and I weren't here, you wouldn't even know what you had done to my sister. Can it still be fake?" Su Buling sighed, unable to explain. "I said it was Xiao Qi who knew you were here and deliberately seduced me first. Do you believe it?" Ba dash. Xiao Xiang became even more angry after hearing this and stepped on Su Buling's foot. "Are you lying? I know my sister's temperament better than you. How can I seduce you? You are still making excuses." Su Buling knew that there was nothing to say, so he could only say seriously, "You all know my temper, how could I do something impulsively just because of a word? I just saw Xiao Qi being so proactive and wanted to go along with the flow, forget it. I made the mistake this time, and I admit my mistake." Xiao Xiang and Mrs. Lu naturally knew Su Buling, but just now they couldn't believe what Su Buling could do, and felt that there must be something fishy in it. But seeing is believing, and it's not easy to explain yourself if you're caught red-handed. Mrs. Lu stared at Su Buling for a moment, and could only snort, "Drink less in the future. You are so smart. Even if Xiao Qi seduces you, you shouldn't be fooled." Xiao Xiang was still a little annoyed. "No matter what the reason is, you are at fault for this matter anyway. It's a good thing my sister is not angry. If you don't agree to the marriage because of this, I won't put in a good word for you." After saying this, he turned around and left. Su Buletinling quickly grabbed Xiang and said, "Baby, don't touch me, don't even think about touching me this month." Xiao Xiang took a few steps away, but Ranju was so angry that he ran back and pulled Mrs. Lu away. "You can go and cool down." Mrs. Lu had nothing to say. She looked back at Su Buling and then followed Xiang. Su Buletinling spread his hands and felt helpless. He did not dare to provoke the two angry women and followed him back to his temporary residence. There is another chapter later, but the fragmentation is too much, so I won't post it now. I'll talk about it after it's finished. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 422. Chapter 20 Fire in the Backyard. Su Buling was immediately confused. This was different from what he thought. Xiao Qi was clearly seducing him. Wait, does Xiao Qi know that Bao Bao and Aunt Lu are there? Su Buling's eyes were filled with astonishment. He turned around and saw that Xiao Qi was no longer as shy as she had been before when she wanted to refuse and return the greeting. Her dress was half untied, revealing the black belly band and half of the snowballs underneath. Her eyes were full of tears and she hurriedly got up to cover them up. Then he entered Xiao Xiang'er's arms and cried out with a wow dash. Wu, Xiang'er, I can't live anymore. Xiao Xiang'er hugged her frightened sister and glared at Su Buling. You bastard, are you a human? Su Bulenling's eyes widened and he looked at Xiao Qi in disbelief. He didn't expect that Xiao Qi would actually use a beauty trap to lay a surprise for him. Even if he jumped into the Huihe River, he couldn't clean it up. As for that, Aunt Lu, baby, please listen to my explanation. What do you explain? Mrs. Lu was so angry that she rushed over and slapped Su Buling on the shoulder a few times. How could you do such a thing? You. She was so angry that her tears rolled down her face. Come out. Su Buling couldn't say that Xiao Qi had seduced him. No one would believe such a funny excuse. He felt so miserable at the moment that he couldn't speak out, so he tried to be calm and apologized. I was impulsive, Aunt Lu, don't cry. Xiao Qi suffered the loss of being mute last time, just to vent her anger. She didn't want to go too far, so she grabbed her angry sister and comforted her softly. Xian'er, that's all. He's still young and can be forgiven for being impulsive. I know he likes me, but I just said it too harshly. Xiao Xiang'er was angry and anxious. Sister, why are you still talking to him? Even if I like you, I can't do such a shameful and angry thing after being rejected. Mrs. Lu patted Su Buling's shoulder a few times, then came forward and sniffed. Have you been drinking again? Su Buling couldn't say anything, so he nodded and said, after a day of drinking in a brothel. Are you still going to visit a brothel? Ordinary entertainment. Xiaoting is the host. This Xiaoting, I'm going to find him right now. How dare he make you do this? Mrs. Lu felt a little aggrieved in her eyes. She had been with Su Buling for so long. She never believed that Su Buling could do what he just did when he was sober. These words could be regarded as excusing Su Buling. Xiao Xiang'er didn't believe it in her heart, but seeing was believing. She was her own sister next to her, and she was much more angry. She wished she could cut Su Buling off with scissors now. Miss Xiao's face was filled with pear blossoms. She closed her clothes, and said softly with a bit of grievance, that's all, don't spread this matter, so as not to ruin Prince Su's reputation. I don't mind. Su Bulenling spread his hands and held it in for a long time, but he had nothing to say. Last time he bullied Xiao Qi so miserably in the palace, and now Xiao Qi is taking revenge. What else can he do besides suffer the disadvantage of being dumb? Xiao Xiang'er had a pet peeve on both sides, feeling distressed and angry at the same time. Sister, he must be drunk. I'll teach him a lesson when I go back. Don't let your mind wander. She had even taken off half of her clothes just now, and her innocence was completely ruined. Madame Lu was also afraid that Xiao Qi would not be able to think about it, so she hurriedly walked up to her and comforted her. Yes, your child is not like this usually. This time she came to propose marriage sincerely. She must have been impulsive after drinking. You should think about it and don't do anything stupid. Xiao Qi's face gradually recovered and she sighed softly. You don't know my temper yet, so you won't take it to heart. I will consider the marriage proposal. You can go back first. I want to be quiet. When Mrs. Lu and Xiao Xiang'er saw this, they couldn't say any more and hurriedly chased Su Buling, who had caused trouble, out of the attic. Su Buling's face was filled with despair. When he saw the cunning look of revenge in Xiao Qi's eyes, an unknown fire arose in his heart. When he walked out of the room, he pinched Xiao Qi's back with his right hand as fast as lightning. "Handle, it's quite powerful." "Wu." Xiao Qi shivered in pain and glared at Su Buling fiercely. Mrs. Lu and Xiang'er, who had no shame to see Xiao Qi, turned around after hearing the sound. Su Buling had already walked out without noticing Su Buling's little move. Xiao Qi didn't dare to say anything. She gritted her teeth and said, "I'm fine, you guys go back first." After Mrs. Lu and Xiang'er went out, she secretly rubbed the sore spot with her hand. Soon, the three of them left the villa together and headed to Xiajiazhuang not far away. On the narrow path between the willow trees, Mrs. Lu and Xiang'er couldn't restrain themselves anymore. They were both angry like tigresses. They took turns pinching Su Buling's waist from left to right and said angrily, "Your Majesty, have you lost your mind and gone crazy? Even if you drink, you can't do that kind of thing to Miss Xiao." "Su Buling, that's my sister. Could it be that you got the wrong person? Fortunately, my sister is tough and steady. If she were an ordinary woman, she would just jump into the river, you know. We are here to propose marriage. If you do this to others, they will not dare to marry even if they want to." Su Buletinling's scalp was numb from being pinched and he did not dare to fight back. He could only say helplessly, "Aunt Lu, you still don't believe me, how could I be so unruly? This isn't your first time." Mrs. Lu's eyes widened slightly, her expression stiffened when she realized she had said something wrong, and she didn't even think about explaining it. After all, this matter was much more advantageous than taking advantage of her. Su Buling only felt a headache. "I'm not drunk, so there's no way I could do that kind of thing. I've seen it all." Xiao Xiang'er was so angry that her teeth itched. She raised her hand and pinched Su Buling's waist again. "You were clearly holding my sister down just now. If Hongluan and I weren't here, you wouldn't even know what you had done to my sister. Can it still be fake?" Su Buling sighed, unable to explain. "I said it was Xiao Qi who knew you were here and deliberately seduced me first. Do you believe it?" Ba dash. Xiao Xiang'er became even more angry after hearing this and stepped on Su Buling's foot. "Are you lying? I know my sister's temperament better than you. How can I seduce you? You are still making excuses." Su Buling knew that there was nothing to say, so he could only say seriously, "You all know my temper, how could I do something impulsively just because of a word? I just saw Xiao Qi being so proactive and wanted to go along with the flow, forget it. I made the mistake this time, and I admit my mistake." Xiao Xiang'er and Mrs. Lu naturally knew Su Buling, but just now they couldn't believe what Su Buling could do, and felt that there must be something fishy in it. But seeing is believing, and it's not easy to explain yourself if you're caught red-handed. Mrs. Lu stared at Su Buling for a moment, and could only snort, "Drink less in the future. You are so smart. Even if Xiao Qi seduces you, you shouldn't be fooled." Xiao Xiang'er was still a little annoyed. "No matter what the reason is, you are at fault for this matter anyway. It's a good thing my sister is not angry. If you don't agree to the marriage because of this, I won't put in a good word for you." After saying this, he turned around and left. Su Buletinling quickly grabbed Xiang'er and said, "Baby, don't touch me, don't even think about touching me this month." Xiao Xiang'er took a few steps away, but Ranju was so angry that he ran back and pulled Mrs. Lu away. "You can go and cool down." Mrs. Lu had nothing to say. She looked back at Su Buling and then followed Xiang'er. Su Buletinling spread his hands and felt helpless. He did not dare to provoke the two angry women and followed him back to his temporary residence. There is another chapter later, but the fragmentation is too much, so I won't post it now. I'll talk about it after it's finished. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 423. The night is getting darker, and most of the girls in the house have gone to bed. The maids were waiting at the door. When they saw Mrs. Lu and Xiao Xiang'er coming back, they wanted to go forward to greet them, but Xiao Xiang'er pulled Mrs. Lu directly back to the room. She was obviously still angry. For a while, the maids were too scared to disturb them. Secretly looking at the young prince behind him, Su Buling knew that he would never see the baby tonight, so he said good night outside the door and walked to his bedroom alone. Although she was tricked by Miss Xiao, her daring to use a beauty trick meant that Miss Xiao had already acquiesced in the marriage. Su Buling couldn't be said to be angry at all. He could only wait until after the marriage to avenge this revenge. Well, I have to let it go. The baby will make another foxtail. Su Buling was thinking about how to deal with the future princess concubine. Ning Yuhi, who had disappeared for a day, suddenly walked out of the room. Under the bright moonlight, Ning Yuhi, wearing a plain white dress, stood at the door, with a slightly unnatural expression on her face, and a slight blush on her snow-white skin. She bit her thin lips lightly, but hesitated to speak. She looks like a gentle little daughter-in-law who has no idea. Ning Yuhi has a very good temper, as warm as spring water in March, and even has a sense of resignation. Su Buletinling was tricked by Miss Xiao. The baby is not loved by the aunt. When she saw the most obedient master, she naturally felt much better. She stepped forward and said warmly, "Master, Ning Yuhi was bullied badly last night, and she hasn't recovered yet." She didn't want to see Su Buling, but the situation was obviously not right just now. She was afraid that something had gone wrong, so she asked, "Ling what happened?" "Nothing." Su Buring chuckled lightly, walked to Ning Yuhi and took her hand. Ning Yuhi was stunned for a moment. He retracted his hand, his eyes showed a bit of panic, and refused to move. He tilted his head to indicate that Man Ji was in the room. "I have some business today and I want to ask Master for advice. Let's go to the house and talk." Su Buletinling said something decent and pulled the master towards his room. Ning Yuhi was not stupid, how could he not understand what his apprentice was thinking? If he went in, he would definitely suffer again. He was busy trying to break free, but couldn't find a reason to refuse. He could only show an anxious look and moan like a mosquito. "The way. Ling you are going too far. You can't do this. Xiao Gongsha just painted it yesterday, we are masters and apprentices, not." With a smile on his face, Su Buletinling pushed his master into the room and made a fuss. Ning Yuhi's eyes were full of embarrassment, he held his clothes with his arms to dodge, and his voice was soft. "Ling I'm angry if you do this again, you can't break your promise." Su Buling closed the door, put his arms around his master's waist, and wanted to kiss Fangs. Although the relationship between them had not been established for a long time, he knew Ning Yuhi quite well. He would resist weakly every time and could not escape after a few kisses, so he cooperated honestly. Ning Yuhi's eyes were watery, and he didn't know how to resist Su Buling's advances. He could only close his eyes and lean back slightly. He whispered, "We really can't continue. How can we walk by the river without getting our shoes wet? Oh, you." Whispering, the voice gradually became quieter, leaving only two inaudible breathing sounds. At dusk, Su Buling had not returned yet, and only the maidservant was sitting in the corridor chatting in the back house. Song Yufa returned from a trip and returned to her house. She rubbed her sore legs and smiled helplessly as she looked at the silent house. The four girls went out to play today, which was not interesting to talk about. After Zhongli Chuchu left, Ning Qingyi rarely spoke and followed carefully as a bodyguard. After they got off the boat, she and Zhu Manzi took a long circle around Shungeng Mountain. She wanted to visit Shungeng Academy, while Manzi wanted to go to Fairy Lake. After some discussion, they both decided to go without giving in. As a result, she almost died without knowing martial arts. When Song Yufu was in Chang'an, because there were very few women in the Imperial College, she basically had no close friends of the same age. After spending a day with two like-minded and incompatible women from the world, she felt quite happy, not as expected. Not easy to contact. After going out, we got acquainted with each other and could be considered friends. However, after returning to the house, we still couldn't play together. Ning Qingyi practiced martial arts and meditated every day, and went into the house and refused to come out when he came back. Manzi, on the other hand, wanted to be a hero and pestered Nightingale to compete in martial arts. Song Yufu was powerless and couldn't even get a word in. She had nothing to do except sit in the room in a daze. The room was very quiet. Daodu and the maid stayed together. Song Yufu sat for a while, then got up and walked to the portrait hanging in the room to look at it. The portrait is of course an authentic painting of a beautiful woman by Su Buling. It is the only one of its kind in the world. Even Xiao Xiang'er and Mrs. Lu often come over to admire it. Song Yufu carefully looked at the handsome man standing horizontally in the Tai Chi hall, with no concealment of admiration in her eyes. However, no matter how beautiful the portrait was, it could not compare to the real person. She unconsciously thought of Su Buling again. In fact, I was thinking about it all the time. I also wanted to play with Su Buling when I went out today. Unfortunately, there were so many girls in the back house, and it was obviously impossible to occupy it alone. Song Yufu touched the wine gourd given to her by Su Buling and thought for a moment. When she was wandering around today, she met many poor people fleeing the city. She also heard that there were water bandits in Hongshan Lake. This place is under the rule of King Wu, and it has nothing to do with Su Buling, but as the prince of a feudal lord, it is normal to talk about the sufferings of the people. After reading this for a few moments, Song Yufu made up her mind and dressed up seriously in front of the dressing table. She painted her eyebrows and dotted her lips to look pretty, and then she lay down on the desk and waited quietly. I don't know how long I had been thinking about it, but Su Buling finally came back. Song Yufu was about to go out to say hello, but she heard that Su Buling had something to discuss with Miss Ning's master. Song Yufu hesitated for a moment, and then she didn't go there immediately. She walked back and forth in the house until the moon was on the branches. If she waited any longer, it would be tomorrow, and she thought that the matter should be finished, so she walked out of the door lightly. The backyard covers a large area, so Su Buling naturally lives in the main courtyard. Song Yufu walked through the corridor next to the lotus pond. Before she got close to Su Buling's room, Nightingale came out from inside, with a bit of strangeness in her big black eyes. "Miss Song, did you take the wrong way?" Song Yufu blushed slightly, and wanted to leave, but then she thought that she had something to do with Su Buling, not to have an affair, so she smiled and said, "I have something to do with Master Su, so I came to see him." Then she walked in. Nightingale's snow-white face was a little nervous, but the young master's woman was walking around, and she, as a personal maid, couldn't stop her. If Song Yufu was suspicious, she would definitely take the blame. After thinking for a while, she coughed to remind the young master, and then passed by. Song Yufu said goodbye to Nightingale and came to Su Buling's room. The lights were still on in the bedroom, and it was so quiet that I couldn't see anyone. "Master Su." Song Yufu walked to the door, raised her hand and knocked, then adjusted her goose yellow skirt and bun to make sure there was no problem. "The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 424. On a quiet winter night, a quiet girl stood at the door, her hands folded over her eyes, the light of the lamp shone through the window paper and printed on her beautiful cheeks, revealing a hazy beauty. The bedroom was very quiet, and a clear voice broke out after a while, and the tone was as calm as ever. "Yufu, why are you here?" "Well, I'm already asleep." "Oh." Song Yufu's eyes flashed a little disappointed. After all, a grown man can sleep and not get up. If the lights are not turned off, it means he is not asleep. Could it be that he dislikes me for disturbing him in the middle of the night? Thinking of this, Song Yufu lowered her head and turned to leave, but she stopped after walking half a step. "Since I'm here, I have to say a few words. It doesn't seem good to turn around and leave. Su Shizi, I went out to play with Man Zi Qingyi today and met Zhongli Chuchu." "Well?" A flat response came from the room. Song Yufu pursed her lips, turned her back to the door and looked at the tip of her shoes, and said softly, "Miss Chuchu has a good heart. Qingyi said you shouldn't go to brothels and excused you." "Yeah, is that so?" "Yes, I met some poor people fleeing on the way. I heard that there were pirates in Hongshan Lake, robbing people and money everywhere, and even peeling people's skins. It was scary to hear." "Oh, it was scary." The answer was obviously too perfunctory, and he didn't take the words to heart at all. Song Yufu had heard it a long time ago, and she could no longer bear it. Her eyes were suddenly misty, and she turned around and faced the door. "I'm going to tell you something serious. You are the prince of a vassal king. There is a bandit problem in Jiangnan and refugees have traveled thousands of miles. Even if it is not under your rule, you should remind the king of Wu, or write a memorial to the court and report it to the emperor." "What are you saying?" Well, I already know about it and am considering how to deal with it." "Don't worry." "What am I worried about? I am not an official. A king should put the people and the country first. If you don't like to hear it, I won't say it." Song Yufu's words were a little tearful, and she was obviously very aggrieved. When Su Buling brought her out of Yulu Mountain, she followed him out without any hesitation. There were so many people in the house, and she didn't fight or compete. Even if she had nothing in common with women of the same age, she still tried her best to get along with them, because she liked Su Buling and didn't want to ask for anything more. As long as he was around, she was satisfied. During the day, when she was busy or with other girls, Song Yufu never interfered. But now, she was alone in the middle of the night and she just came over to talk to Su Buling. If she was not allowed to enter, she could talk outside the door, but she was standing outside the door absent-mindedly and coldly. She was a woman who knew nothing except reading a lot of books. She had no relatives or friends around her, only Su Buling. In this case, why did he bring her out in the first place? Song Yufu felt wronged and couldn't hold back her tears. She turned around and left. "Yufu, I didn't mean that." "Don't be angry." "Then what do you mean? You didn't even let me in." "You." Song Yufu felt more and more wronged the more she thought about it. She turned around and pushed open the door. She wanted to talk to Su Buling face to face. If he didn't care about her, she would just go back to Yulu Mountain. Why pretend to like her and keep her by his side? The candlelight in the room flickered twice. There was a strange smell in the air, and there was a barely audible sound of almost. Song Yufu was a little excited and didn't notice these things. She looked up and saw Su Buling still lying on the bed on the inside. He was shirtless and his hair was a little messy. There were beads of sweat on his handsome face. He showed a very far-fetched smile. "Yufu, don't get excited. I really don't mean that, I'm practicing." "What kind of practice are you practicing?" Song Yufu was not stupid. How could she practice while lying on the bed? She walked up to him with a wronged look, staring at Su Buling with red eyes. "Don't you like me? If you don't like me, I'll leave. Anyway, there's nothing to do in Jiangnan. Su Buling leaned against the head of the bed, trying to be calm, pulled the quilt up a little, covering the corner of the belly band exposed under the quilt, and smiled. Of course I like it, how could I not like it? Women's minds are very sensitive. Song Yufu obviously heard that these words were eager to comfort her. Her face turned pale, she sobbed for 2 years, stared at Su Buling, and her whole body began to tremble slightly. Su Buling's scalp was numb, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Yufu, I'm not wearing any clothes. You go out first, I'll come out soon. You kissed me, I'm already yours, why are you worrying about these things now?" Song Yufu burst into tears. Seeing that Su Buling didn't get up to comfort her at this time, she squatted down aggrievedly, hugged her knees and wanted to bury her head in tears. Unexpectedly, when she squatted down, she saw 2 pairs of shoes on the ground. A pair of white cloud-patterned boots, belonging to Su Buling, and a pair of pure white embroidered shoes, similar to the style on Ning Qingyi's feet. Song Yufu's sobbing stopped, pursed her lips, and took a closer look. It was indeed similar to Ning Qingyi's, and it was obvious that the boots were sewn by one person. She slowly raised her head and looked at the quilt in front of her, only to find that the quilt was a little bulging, which was obviously inconsistent with Su Buling's figure. Oh my God! Song Yufu was full of disbelief, and stood up and stared at the quilt. Today she thought Ning Qingyi was aloof and didn't like Su Buling that much, but she didn't expect that at night. It turns out that Ning Qingyi is such a woman, reserved and coquettish. No wonder she didn't let her into the house and was absent-minded when talking. Song Yufu's aggrieved thoughts vanished in an instant, and turned into disbelief. Her face turned from white to red, and then became redder and redder. Her aura gradually weakened. Her hands curled up in front of her chest, and she was a little confused. Su Buling coughed awkwardly, gently spread his hands, and had nothing to say. Song Yufu's face was as red as an apple. She lowered her head to look at the boots on the ground, and then looked at the slightly trembling bulge on the bedding. She knew that she shouldn't come in. If she exposed Ning Qingyi's premarital affair on the spot, Ning Qingyi would be too embarrassed to see anyone. What should I do? Song Yufu stared at Su Buling weakly, pointed at the bedding, and then pointed in the direction where Ning Qingyi lived, with a questioning look in her eyes. Su Buling nodded with difficulty, and then said, "I really have no clothes on, how about you go out first?" Song Yufu's face was still covered with tears, and her expression was very strange. The grievance disappeared, and shame and embarrassment followed. How could she dare to stand beside Su Buling when he was having sex? She lowered her head and ran out, and did not forget to respond to comfort Ning Qingyi. "Forget it, you go to sleep first, I'm not angry anymore." After saying that, she ran out of the room in a panic, closed the door, and disappeared outside the room in a hurry. Su Buling's calm face rarely showed a little embarrassment. He sighed, and before he could speak, his arm hurt, and was bitten by his master. "Ah, master, be gentle." Ning Yuhi lifted the quilt, sweating profusely and almost scared to death, her cheeks pale, and she hit Su Buling with tears. "Miss Song didn't find it." "No, master, don't worry." "What should I worry about?" "You evil disciple, I told me to sneak away, but you insisted on taking me, woo." Ning Yuhi was in a state of confusion, lowered his head to look for clothes, wanting to escape from this dangerous place. Su Buling had no way to stop himself just now, and did not expect Fu Bao to be so bold to rush into the house. Now that he found something wrong and left, it was too late to hide, so he covered Ning Yuhi with the quilt and comforted him softly. "Master, don't panic, it's okay. Get out of the way, don't, woo-woo." The curtain swayed, and after a moment of fighting back and forth, the room slowly quieted down. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 425. In the blink of an eye, 3 days later, the weather was a bit colder again, and the Zhuang was calm. Except for people coming and going, nothing else happened. Manzi is still the same as a pistachio, occasionally running to Su Buling to sweeten it, and then dragging the little sisters around, listening to books, tasting Jiangnan delicacies and so on. Song Yufu was frightened. As a young lady from a traditional scholarly family, being unmarried and having sex with a man was no small matter. She looked at Ning Qingyi with a strange look and did not dare to tell others. She hid in front of Mrs. Lu all day long. I don't know if she's afraid that her boyfriend will do the same to her. Naturally, Ning Qingyi knew nothing about this. Apart from practicing kung fu, she just followed Manzi around. She was more like a Taoist nun than her master. Ning Yuhi, on the other hand, was in a much more complicated mood. He was almost discovered last time and was so frightened that he lost his energy for several days. If Su Buling hadn't allowed it, he would have secretly fled in fear of crime. Now he doesn't dare to see Su Buling anymore. I found a Taoist temple nearby to stay temporarily to cover up the disappearance of the palace guard Sand. Su Buring received the invitation from King Wu and was about to leave for a short trip to Hangzhou. He did not harass the master again and asked her to be clean for 2 days. Xiao Qi did something bad that night and didn't show up again. Xiang'er is no longer under pressure now, and the unruly and willful temperament of his childhood has recovered a little. He saw with his own eyes that Su Buling lost his bestiality and had a little temper. However, Xiang'er also knew that her sister was powerful and could do anything, so she also had doubts about what happened that night. The main reason why Su Buling was not allowed to go to bed was because he had been bullied by Su Buling in the past year. It was not easy to find something Su Buling could do wrong, so he took the opportunity to complain a little. Fussing between husband and wife is also a kind of fun. Su Buling is not an impatient person, he is serious about coaxing the baby, and his love words are so disgusting that Xiao Xiang'er can't stand it, so he half-heartedly stops making trouble. In the early morning, when the sky was just getting dark, Su Buling leaned on the pillow in the back room of the house, his cheek pressed against Xiang'er's soft hair, and he held Xiang'er in his arms. Xiao Xiang'er leaned her back against Su Buring's chest, lying on her side with her arm as a pillow, her fingers gently rubbing the carvings on the mahogany plaque, her beautiful apricot eyes carrying a different meaning. There are exactly 20 positive characters on the redwood sign. From the end of February to the present, the goal of 100 times has finally been met. Looking at the carvings on the wooden sign, Xiao Xiang'er can remember the scene when each Zheng character was written, as well as the mood when carving it. From the first few strokes, he was full of grief, anger, helplessness, and felt the number of times too much anxiety, the ease of carving after getting used to it, the entanglement and helplessness of setting off to Huainan, the cherishment of words when the number of times is almost over, the relief and the strange sense of accomplishment. After carving the last stroke last night, the carvings on the brand perfectly show the emotional journey of the two people. They may never be forgotten in this life, and they will never be forgotten. I promise, 100 times is enough. Xiao Xiang'er held the small mahogany sign in her hand and murmured softly. She didn't know whether it was a sigh or the emptiness after completing the goal. Su Buling held Xiang'er's hand and chuckled, "Yeah, what's the matter?" Xiao Xiang'er was born in a wealthy family. Although she has a cheerful personality, she is still a bit conservative due to her upbringing since childhood. She said slightly uncomfortably, "I used to detoxify you, so I reluctantly helped you. Now that the detoxification is over, we are not married yet, and what else, it feels a bit immoral. Do you want to separate beds?" Su Buring smiled softly and raised his hand to take the foxtail from the exquisite wooden box on the bedside. Xiao Xiang'er's expression changed slightly, she grabbed Su Buling's hand, turned around in her arms, and begged for mercy, "Good brother, I'm serious, it's not that I won't let you, the baby is wrong." Su Buring put down his foxtail and raised his hand to pinch her pretty face, How about I write a marriage document and have your sister sign it? Xiao Xiang'er frowned slightly, hesitated for a moment, and was a little unhappy. So casual? After all, I am the legitimate daughter of the Xiao family, and I was also the queen mother. Even if I remarry, I have to pay attention to the veil on the sedan chair and so on. Getting married is a lifelong event, and it is impossible for a woman to not care about it. Xiao Xiang'er is both physically and mentally capable, and she cherishes the hard-won relationship now, and naturally wants to do the best in the future without leaving any regrets. If you just write a marriage certificate casually and change your name to MS in law, it will be a pity when you get older. Su Buling was just joking. He thought carefully for a moment and said softly, "Well, the baby has sacrificed 100 times to save me. As the saying goes, a drop of kindness should be repaid by a spring. Now that I have detoxified, I will naturally repay the favor and give it back to the baby 100 times. How about that? Is this called paying me back?" Xiao Xiang'er narrowed her eyes slightly, took a deep breath, and risked being punished by Su Buletin, and took a sip. "Do you think I'm stupid? What a beautiful idea." Su Buring shook his head and explained with a friendly smile, "In the past, when you detoxified me, you had to listen to me for everything. You had to do whatever I said. Give the baby back 100 times, now you have to listen to the baby for everything. I'll do whatever you ask me to do, okay?" This statement is quite interesting. In the past, it was Su Buling who made the decision. Xiao Xiang'er had no role to speak except calling her good brother, so she was allowed to make the decision. Xiao Xiang'er blinked her eyes, half believing, "Do you really listen to what I say? You were the boss before, please, you still go your own way, I don't believe you." Su Buletinling's eyes were serious. "I Su Buletinling will do what I say. If you say you listen to the baby, you will listen to the baby. If you don't let me kiss you, I will never make trouble." Xiao Xiang'er twisted her hair with her fingers, thought for a while, and nodded vaguely, "Okay, if you say you will pay it back 100 times, then pay it back 100 times. We are settling accounts, not doing it behind your back. I will remember it for you." As she spoke, she picked up the small mahogany sign, first engraved Xiao Xiang'er on the front, then turned it over and engraved Su Buling's name on it, foreshadowing the beginning of a journey of sexual repayment. Su Buling looked at it with some amusement in his heart, looked at the sky outside, and it was still early, so he whispered, "My dear baby, do you want me to pay back the debt?" "Pay back the debt?" Xiao Xiang'er may have been interested in this statement. Her expression was dignified and noble, revealing a bit of the posture of a creditor, and she said lightly, Su Buling nodded slightly and went to get the foxtail again. Xiao Xiang'er suddenly became anxious, and her eyes showed a bit of embarrassment. "Don't use that thing." "Okay." Su Buling put it down honestly and sighed with a little disappointment. Xiao Xiang'er bit her lower lip, looked at her stinky brother for a few times, hesitated for a moment, and raised her hand to hit him on the shoulder helplessly. "Forget it, use it if you want, I won't embarrass you." "Okay, hee. You laugh again? I'll kick you down." "I won't laugh anymore." You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 426. The winter morning light shone throughout the Xiao family manor, dispersing the white fog. 2 carriages were parked outside the Xiao family's ancestral home. Xiao Ting, who was not yet awake, was dragged up by the maid, stuffed into the carriage, and continued to fall asleep. Xiao Ting was going to Jinling to attend a poetry meeting, and Xiao Qi and Su Buling were also going to Hangzhou to attend the birthday banquet of King Wu, so they simply set off together. In the temporary residence, the girls had just gotten up and washed up. Madame Lu was already fully dressed and instructing the maids to carry various items to the boat at the Huihe River ferry. I have returned to Jiangnan, and my parents' home is in Jinling, 300 miles away. We happened to be passing by, so we went back together to have a look. In the wing room of the back house, Su Buling was wearing a robe in front of the bronze mirror with a smile on his lips. Xiang'er's face turned red and she couldn't get up. She huddled under the quilt and held a small sign. She carefully carved out a 1, then put the sign under the pillow and raised her eyes. "Come back soon, I'm waiting for you to pay off your debt." Su Buring nodded, turned around and kissed Xiang'er's forehead, and covered the quilt more tightly. "Sleep a little longer. I'll be back in a few days. If you're hungry." He raised his hand and picked up what the baby made by himself. The golden quail egg was placed in her hand. "Comfort yourself, I don't mind." "Sai, you're the one who's greedy. Do you think I'm Hongluan?" Xiao Xiang'er threw the quail eggs aside with a hint of disgust, turned her back and ignored them. Su Buling blinked. "What else does Aunt Lu want for herself?" "How do I know?" "Ask her yourself." "How can I ask this?" Su Buring shook his head, turned around and left the room. After cleaning up for a while, he led Chai Feng Ma to the door of the house. "It would take several months to go back and forth to Hangzhou, and I couldn't bring all the girls with me to King Wu's birthday banquet. Only Mrs. Lu and Xiao Qi were going together." Hearing that Su Buling was going out for a trip, Zhu Manzi was very reluctant and ran over to Su Buling and whispered, "Mr. Su, you go early and come back early. I'm still waiting to go back to Suzhou with you to see the Sea of Flowers. If you delay for too long, I won't be able to go back until next summer." Su Buling raised his hand and rubbed the branches. "I'll be back soon. I'll be accompanying King Yi and Yufu around Huainan these days. If I find any good places, I'll note them down and go with them when I come back." Oh. Zhu Manzi actually wanted to go with him, but it was obviously not possible to just take her with him. It would also be inconvenient to take them all to the birthday banquet, so he was considerate and didn't need to say more. Ning Qingyi came out to see her off, her expression still cold, her eyes focused elsewhere, and she seemed to have nothing to say. Song Yufu was a little embarrassed. She had not yet recovered from what happened last time, so she kept her head down and said nothing. Seeing Su Buling saying hello and saying goodbye to Ning Qingyi, and Ning Qingyi's lukewarm response, she secretly muttered in her heart, "They pretended to look alike, they all slept together." Naturally, Ning Qingyi knew nothing about this. She stood in front of Su Buling and frowned. "Su Buling, have you made the master angry?" "The master has gone to the Taoist temple in the past 2 days and refused to see me." Su Buletinling led Chai Feng Ma, feeling a little embarrassed, and said softly, "Don't think too much, there are many people in the house, master is not used to it, it's just a few days of pure cultivation." Ning Qingyi was Su Buling's senior sister now, so she didn't have much to say. She just said, "Be careful on the road," and then looked away. Su Buling walked up to Song Yufu and wanted to say goodbye, but Song Yufu turned red, lowered her head in a hurry, and gave an inaudible hum. Su Buling had no choice but to whisper in his ear, "Don't talk nonsense about what happened last time." Cut. Song Yufu leaned back slightly to avoid it, not knowing what it meant. Su Buling was a little worried, fearing that Fu Bao would set the back house on fire. He wanted to give a few words of advice, but Mrs. Lu, who was waiting by the carriage, could no longer stand it. "Even if you are saying goodbye to the girl, why are you still whispering in her ear? There are still maids and coachmen around." Mrs. Lu folded her hands on her waist, looked very dignified, and said softly, "Your Majesty, let's go." Seeing this, Su Buling had no choice but to give up, get on his horse, and leave quickly with Nightingale escorting the carriage. In front of the stone lions outside the mansion, Zhu Manzi watched the horse in white go away, a little reluctantly, and sighed softly. "Xiaoning, Mr. Su went to the world alone and didn't want you. Are you very unhappy? Ning Qingyi was confused, walking beside Manzi, frowning and said, why am I unhappy? What if Mr. Su meets a girl who is more beautiful than you outside? Ning Qingyi tilted her head slightly and raised her hand to touch her cheek. Qing Shui's eyes showed a bit of pride, obviously thinking that there could be no girl prettier than her in the world. Zhu Manzi didn't want to talk to Ning Qingyi anymore. He turned to look at Song Yufu, who was still behind and refused to leave, and said doubtfully, Miss Song, are you okay? Song Yufu's face looked a little strange. After thinking for a while, she walked behind the two of them with a smile, her eyes always on Ning Qingyi's buttocks. It's nothing, I'm just a little tired after a day of shopping last time. Zhu Manzi naturally had no doubts and said with a smile, then you have to practice more. My daughter's family still needs to know some martial arts. Ning Qingyi was very skilled in martial arts and her sixth sense was quite sharp. She noticed that Song Yufu had been secretly staring at her in the past 2 days, with strange eyes. She turned around and said warmly, Miss Song, why do you keep looking at me? Well. Song Yufu's face turned slightly red, and she looked at Ning Qingyi calmly, her expression was calm with a bit of doubt, nothing strange at all. They really look alike, huh? Song Yufu didn't say anything, just smiled and said, nothing, I just think Miss Ning has a good figure, I envy her. Ning Qingyi tilted his head slightly, looked at his figure for a few times, and nodded slightly. Miss Song is not bad either. Song Yufu smiled shyly and didn't answer. The sun rose, the sunlight sprinkled on the Huihe River ferry, and the moored ships set sail one after another. The guards escorted various items to the Xiao family's ship. Madame Lu and Xiao Qi walked side by side on the deck, talking about family matters. Su Buling followed behind, his expression was calm and serious, and Xiao Ting next to him was sleepy, complaining that it was still early. Huainan is a big city, and it is also located at the throat of Zhongzhou. Shipping and land transportation are very developed. There are nearly 100 large and small ships moored at the dock, and there is no end in sight. On the west side of the port, far away from the Xiao family's ship, Wang Ruiyang, the legitimate son of the Wang family in Hangzhou, also boarded his own ship with his entourage, followed by a group of students from Shungang Academy, all of whom were heading to Jinling to participate in the Jiangnan Literary Festival at the end of the year. As a legitimate son of a powerful family, Wang Ruiyang was not as ambitious as Xiao Ting, and had no interest in poetry and songs. This time he came here simply to wait for Su Buling to go to the south of the Yangtze River and inquire about the whereabouts of the jade. Seeing that the Xiao family's ship began to set sail, Wang Ruiyang also raised his hand and asked the boatman to set off. Before the pedal was put away, Wang Ruiyang's guard came over with a letter in his hand, pointed to the middle-aged Jianghu guest in Taoist robes standing under the boat, and whispered a few words. Wang Ruiyang raised his hand to take the envelope, turned around and opened it to take a look. It simply said, try to make friends with him and give the jade as a birthday gift. The meaning is simple, try to make friends with Su Buling, and encourage Su Buling to give the jade as a birthday gift to King Wu. After Wang Ruiyang glanced at it, he put away the letter and went back to the cabin to find a counselor to discuss. The boat slowly left the shore. The middle-aged Taoist priest who came to deliver the letter did not pay attention to Wang Ruiyang, but stayed on the Xiao family's painted boat in the distance. He looked at the young man in white standing with Xiao Ting and frowned slightly. The Taoist priest was Wu Yu, a wild Taoist who had just returned from northern Qi. After sending Xiao Dehua to the capital of northern Qi to worship the national teacher Zhou Qingkaiu as his teacher, Wu Yu returned to Jiangnan and continued to work for the Eagle Fighting Tower. There are many masters in the Eagle Fighting Tower. Famous swordsmen like Chang Shijian can only run around to lead newcomers. Although Wu Yu has superb light skills, his combat effectiveness is average. The most suitable job is naturally to run errands and deliver letters. After handing the letter to Wang Ruiyang, the mission was completed. Now I don't have to worry about the safety of my brother's wife and daughter. I am alone and have nothing to worry about. I have to do what I should do. Wu Yu looked at Su Buling's figure, hesitated for a moment at the ferry, and finally turned and walked towards a ferry to Jinling. 2 updates today, the rest is not finished yet. I will post it during the day if I finish it, and tomorrow if I don't finish it. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 427. The river rises and falls, and sails often float past the window in the opposite direction. The Xiao family's boat is Xiao Qi's special vehicle. It doesn't look ostentatious from the outside. It's similar to an ordinary small merchant ship. There are no places to play inside. Apart from Xiao Qi's residence, there are only a few guest rooms. In this world, traveling by boat is very boring. It's cold and windy and we can't enjoy the scenery. Everyone sits in the room in a daze. Xiao Ting kept yelling all morning and didn't wake up. As soon as she got on the ship, she was punished by Miss Xiao to copy books because she stepped into the cabin with her left foot first. The door was locked and she occasionally said, "Auntie, I was wrong, Su Buletin Ling, please help me." He said. In the room near the shore, Mrs. Lu was sitting on a carved couch with her half-embroidered robe on her knees. She covered her ears and said impatiently, "Your Majesty, go and clean up Xiao Ting, you are annoying me to death with your quarrels." Mrs. Lu was born in the south of the Yangtze River. She has not returned to her hometown for a long time. She is about to go to her parents' home. She does not have the psychological burden of Xiang. She is in a very good mood. The action of covering her ears actually reveals the naughty demeanor of the little sour radish back then. Su Buling sat next to him drinking tea, turning a deaf ear to Xiao Ting's shouts, and said casually, "He's always been like this. He cleans up and forgets about it in the afternoon." Mrs. Lu knew Xiao Ting's temperament, so she snorted, "Xiao Qi and Xiao Xiang are both smart people, why is Xiao Ting so stupid? Fortunately, he is not my nephew." After saying that, she picked up the robe and continued to embroider. With a bit of a smile on his lips. "Your Majesty, last time you said that Xiao Qi deliberately seduced you, I naturally believe it. If Xiao Qi dares to use this method, she must still want to agree to the marriage. You have to work harder this time and try to disguise Xiao Qi when you get back. The boat will take you back to Suzhou. With a good wife like Xiao Qi, I won't have to keep an eye on you all day." Faced with this imperceptible proposition, Su Buling chuckled and said, "Xiao Qi has a good sense of right and wrong, but when it comes to running a house, she is definitely not as good as Aunt Lu. The male is the outsider and the female is the inside. From now on, she will enter my Su family. You still have to listen to Aunt Lu's arrangements." Mrs. Lu paused for a moment, and then replied after a long while, "Nonsense, she is going to be a princess. It has nothing to do with my master's guilt." As she said this, her eyebrows were crooked and she was obviously satisfied. There was nothing to do on the ship except drinking tea, and there was only Mrs. Lu around to entertain her. Su Buling watched Mrs. Lu embroidery. After sitting for a long time, she felt a little bored. After thinking about it, she put down the teacup, raised her hand and pressed Mrs. Lu's shoulder, and gently rubbed it a few times. "Aunt Lu, I'm tired after sitting for so long. Right? Let me press your shoulders." Mrs. Lu's body stiffened and she twisted her shoulders slightly, obviously trying to avoid it. She was about to say, "I am your aunt," but for some reason, she felt a little embarrassed to say it now. Su Buling curled his lips slightly, seeing that Aunt Lu was in a good mood and had no intention of resisting. After rubbing it for a moment, his hand slid down the waist and gradually reached his ribs, and he supported her quietly. After all, Mrs. Lu was not Ning Yuhi. She endured it for a moment. Seeing that Su Buletin Ling was still more energetic, She picked up the embroidery needle and tried to poke it. She frowned and said, "Go find Xiao Qi, I'm not tired. Don't disturb Auntie." Su Buling stopped his hand without saying anything. Seeing that Mrs. Lu's face was red and she was having trouble, he got up to say goodbye and came to Xiao Qi's room. The cabin was very quiet, except for Xiao Ting's roar from time to time. The maids were all sitting in their rooms waiting for orders. Xiao Qi is the head of the Xiao family. Her position forces her to become a workaholic and a strong woman. She also has a relatively strong personality. Although she has never been too harsh on the maids, her aura is such that even Nightingale has a bit of stage fright and hides away obediently. Practice on the other side of the boat. At this time, in the corridor, the maid Lan Hua, who was taller than Su Buling, was leaning against the door of Xiao Ting's room with her arms folded to prevent Xiao Ting's personal maid from sending melon seeds and snacks to Xiao Ting. Su Buling walked outside Xiao Qi's study. There was some moisture on the boat in winter, so the door was not closed for ventilation, and there was a brass stove inside. The furnishings in the study room are not much different from those in the Linhe villa. There are no other items except the bookshelf and desk. Xiao Qi, who always wears a simple and elegant black dress, sits behind the desk with her back straight, looking at the recent account books of Jinling Industry. As the largest family in Daiyue, the Huainan Xiao family cannot only have one small village. The various properties accumulated over thousands of years may not be remembered as belonging to the family without looking at the brochures. These properties are usually taken care of by the uncles in each house of the Xiao family. Xiao Qi came over and took a look. "Miss Xiao. Come in." Xiao Qi turned over a page of the account book in her hand without looking up. The neat and solemn furnishings, coupled with a serious expression, eyes like autumn water, and eyebrows like willow leaves, had a somewhat different kind of beauty. Su Buletinling has long been accustomed to Xiao Qi's lukewarmness. After all, this is her personality. The last time Xiao Qi used a beauty trap, he didn't know that there were women wearing black underwear in this world. This alone can give him a rough idea of his personality. Su Buling closed the door, walked to the opposite side of the desk, pulled out a taishi chair and sat down with a cold and extraordinary posture, looking at Xiao Qi's face. Xiao Qi raised her eyes and took a look, then looked at the account book again, and said softly, "You ruined my innocence. I'll take revenge on you once. You and I will be clean. Let's just pretend that what happened in the past never happened." Although his tone was calm, Su Buletinling began to explain what happened last time before he could speak. He was obviously still afraid that Su Buletinling would make a mess. Su Buletinling smiled secretly in his heart and naturally said nothing to this, but instead said, "King Wu invited me to a banquet, and he will definitely find a way to ask for the jade pendant from me. The remaining one of the 4 jades must be in the hands of King Wu. Have you found any clues recently?" Seeing Su Buling talking about business, Xiao Qi finally relaxed a little, closed the account book, stood up and walked to the window, picked up the teapot and poured 2 cups of tea. "I checked the family files. The god of war Zhou founded the Great Qi, and my ancestors of the Xiao family served as military advisors for him." Hearing this opening remark, Su Buling couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Zhou was a figure from more than 300 years ago. 300 years ago, the ancestors of the Su family were probably still playing in the mud in some remote and poor place, and the ancestors of the Song family were still a down-and-out noble who tightened his belt to make a living. With just a few words, the foundation of Daiyu's first family was fully displayed. The Su family has only been prosperous for 3 generations, and in the eyes of the aristocratic families, they are standard nouveau riche. Su Buling married the legitimate daughter of an old aristocratic family like the Xiao family. Strictly speaking, Xiao Qi was marrying down. However, Xiao Qi had already given her body to Su Buling, so it was meaningless to care about her status. This sentence was just a matter of fact. At that time, there were records left in the family. Zhojixian did give 4 jade artifacts to 4 disciples. At that time, Zhojixian was not dead, and he had not written down military books or martial arts experience, so it was definitely not recorded in the Tongtian treasure book as rumored in the martial arts world. According to records, Zhojixian was originally a hermit. When the great Qi pacified the world, he came out of the mountains to assist the emperor of Qi. After his success, he retired for a period of time and no one could find him. Later, the emperor of Qi could not stabilize the government and the major generals, so the 4 disciples invited Zhojixian back. It stands to reason that one person is enough to invite Zhojixian back to the court, but at that time, 4 people from all over the world went together. Could it be that the 4 people worked together to find Zhojixian? Su Buling listened quietly and thought for a while. You mean, Zhojixian has a hiding place that no one can find? The 4 jades record clues that can be found, which is equivalent to the key to the safe. Safe. The location and key of the secret warehouse. Xiao Qi is tall and leans directly on the desk. After pondering for a moment, she nodded gently. It's possible, but it's too long ago. Zhojixian has died long ago. We can't guess what's in the hiding place. Then let's go to the Wuivong mansion to see the situation first. Su Buling finished talking about the business, stopped talking with the teacup in his hand, and glanced at Xiao Qi's figure. This look was obviously a bit presumptuous. Xiao Qi was thinking about something. After realizing that Su Buling's mind was not pure, his expression was slightly condensed. He stood up and walked behind the desk. I never thought that just after taking 2 steps, I felt my whole body tighten. There was no sound behind me, but I was hugged tightly in someone's arms. Wu dash. Xiao Kaibo's eyes were confused, and she turned around with force, looking up at Su Buling who was close at hand, like a frightened wild cat. Su Buling, you are so presumptuous. Su Buling's eyes were calm, and he hugged Xiao Qi's waist and whispered, there was someone in the room a few days ago, so I apologize to you while no one is disturbing me. I really didn't recognize you in Chang'an, and I had to hide it the next day out of helplessness. Wrapped in the masculine aura, Xiao Qi's expression was as firm as ever, but her legs under her skirt trembled involuntarily, and the scenes of that night flooded into her mind uncontrollably. She gently pushed Su Buling's chest. I know, I don't blame you, let me go. Su Buling didn't let go, with some doubts. I didn't recognize you at the time, but how could Miss Xiao cooperate so well? I could feel it if you resisted a little, but not only did you not resist, you played crazier than the baby later. Shut up. Xiao Qi was also called baby last time, so she naturally understood what Su Buling meant. Her eyelashes trembled slightly, and she tried to speak in a calm tone. I was drunk at the time and thought you were a fairy made of wood. What do you want to say? Su Buling focused his eyes on Xiao Qi's eyes. I'll marry you. Xiao Qi frowned slightly, and their eyes met for a moment before she turned away and pushed Su Buling out. I'll think about it. I won't bother with you about what happened today, and I won't do it again. Su Buling was pushed out of the door, shook his head and sighed. Xiao Qi closed the door and bolted it, then leaned against the door, closed her eyes and breathed many times before she slowly calmed down. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 428. We sailed down the river day and night and arrived at Jinling, 300 miles away, around the afternoon of the 2nd day. Jinling is the most famous city in the south of the Yangtze River. Its prosperity even surpasses Chang'an in the northwest. Thousands of pavilions unfold like a painting scroll, and the 18-mile Qinhua River is full of beauties, leaving countless footprints of literati and poets. At dusk, the boat entered the mouth of the Qinhua River outside Jinling city. The not-so-vast river was full of painted boats and merchant ships. Even outside the city, there are still buildings on both sides of the river, and various manors and villas are hidden in them. Literati and ladies walk along the river bank, and there are also scholars who write on the river bank. Su Buling followed his future daughter-in-law out, not wanting to steal the show, but dressed in a white scholar's robe and a square scarf on his head, dressed like a young scholar, standing on the edge of the deck, admiring the beautiful scenery of the river bank. Mrs. Lu was obviously a little excited. She stood beside Su Buling and pointed to the countryside behind the river bank. There, and that manor, the land from Jiangjun Mountain to Longhu, all belong to my Lu family. When I was a child, I often went to the mountain to play, and I went to the temple with your mother to burn incense. She looked like a rich woman introducing her own things. Su Buling stood with his hands behind his back and listened to Mrs. Lu's introduction with a smile, and slowly came to Nanshan port outside Jinling city. In order to protect against foreign enemies, large ships are not allowed to pass through the water gates of Jinling city. It is very cumbersome to enter the city, and you have to report to the government office to remove the iron piles under the water. Therefore, merchant ships load and unload goods at the port outside the city, and the ships of wealthy families are also moored outside the city. Watching the ship slowly approaching the port, Mrs. Lu looked around for a few times, raised her hand and pointed at the several watchtowers built at the entrance of the river bay, and whispered, "When did the government build the watchtower? The people walking on it don't look like soldiers." Su Buling squinted and looked around, but saw that there were many black-robed men with swords on the huge port. Their uniforms were obviously not from the government, but they were dressed in a uniform manner, obviously belonging to the same organization. "Is this a private port?" Su Buling asked, not quite sure. After all, the scale of Nanshan port in front of him was a bit large. All ships coming from the south of Jinling had to dock here to unload, otherwise they had to go around half a circle. With the scale of Jinling city, it is conceivable how large the throughput is. The Su family's collection of import and export tariffs in the western regions is an important source of finance, and they support an army of 200,000. If this Nanshan port is private, it can't just be described as extremely wealthy. Mrs. Lu was also a little confused, and whispered, "Nanshan port has been here since ancient times, and no one dug it out, so how could it be private? My family's boat used to stop here, and there were only warehouses on the shore, and there were no messy people." While speaking, Xiao Qi walked out of the cabin, took a look, and explained. Nanshan port was allocated to the Yang family by the Jinling prefect, and it was like this a few years ago. Mrs. Lu was stunned when she heard this, and said with a little displeasure, "What is the Yang family? The whole world belongs to the king. Can the things of the court be allocated to others?" Xiao Qi's expression was calm, and he said softly, "A few years ago, there were some bandits who robbed money and killed people in Nanshan port. Merchants were panicked, and the government couldn't catch them. Later, Yang Yingxiang of the Yang family volunteered to find some people to watch over Nanshan port and build these things, and the bandits stopped making trouble. Later, they said that they collected some tolls in order to make a living, and the government acquiesced." Su Buling pondered for a while. "It sounds a bit strange." Xiao Qi naturally understood seeing the strangeness in it. He said helplessly, "I secretly asked someone to investigate. The bandits were arranged by Yang Yingxiang. They killed people, kidnapped people, and threatened merchants, and took Nanshan port for themselves. Yang Yingxiang's sister is the concubine of King Wu. With King Wu as a support, it will not be resolved even if it is brought to the emperor. The prefect of Jinling has no choice but to compromise." Hearing this, Su Buling frowned slightly. "Since you know, why don't you do something about it?" Xiao Qi shrugged helplessly. "How can I do something about it?" Mrs. Lu heard someone behind her. The shadow of King Wu was not happy, so he explained to Xiao Qi. "Xiao Qi has no official status, so it is not easy for him to intervene when King Wu is involved. If he writes to Prime Minister Xiao for this matter, he will definitely be at odds with King Wu. The Xiao family lives in Jiangnan, just like the noble families in Suzhou City, who exposed King Su's plundering to the court, and offended him directly. After hearing this explanation, Su Buling understood a little bit. The most taboo thing for the vassal king is that someone reports to the emperor, especially his subordinates. The noble families have always been family-oriented, taking the way of long-term prosperity, knowing how to forbear and analyze the situation, and being smooth and not easily making enemies. Xiao Qi will definitely not make enemies with King Wu for these things, and even if he knows, he can only turn a blind eye. The ship slowly entered the port. Su Buling took a quick look and saw that there were more than 100 ships anchored in it. There were thugs leading the accountants standing on the shore, counting the number of people from house to house and collecting silver and money. Xiao Qi always kept a low profile when traveling in Jiangnan. He just passed by Jinling and did not notify the Lu family to come and greet him. At this time, before the shore, several bandit-like men stood on the dock with knives drawn. The accompanying housekeeper Hua Jingting did not say what it was. He raised his hand and asked the servants to get some silver and arranged for the boatmen to lower the deck. Su Buling saw the scene and frowned slightly. Xiao Qi considered it for a while and said, "It's really hard for me to manage. But the king of Wu came to you this time and asked you to ask for something. You can give Yang Yingxiang a little warning. The king of Wu should not take it to heart. As the prince of a vassal king, you should do the same." Mrs. Lu thought so too. What's wrong with the king of Wu? He has a bunch of old soldiers under his command, which is incomparable to the king of Su. This is public territory. It's not a matter of how much money is extorted from the king of Su. The lineage of the king of Su is not a family. As a vassal king guarding the border, he must not give in to the court and the powerful enemies outside the pass. To put it simply, if you can spend a few taels of silver today to avoid small troubles, you can get a marriage, cede land, pay tribute, and become a vassal tomorrow to avoid big troubles. This is a matter of attitude. Su Buling did not respond, but turned to look at the nightingale next to him. "Nightingale, take Aunt Lu in and wait." "Okay, young master." Nightingale naturally obeyed the order and helped the puzzled Mrs. Lu into the cabin. The ship docked and the deck was lowered. Xiao Qi stepped back a little and did not show up. It seemed that she wanted to see how Su Buling handled things. Su Buling asked the maids and guards to wait on the ship and walked down the deck alone. The thugs and accountants on the shore saw that the boat was carrying people from a wealthy family, and the banditry on their faces subsided a little. The leading man saw a handsome and weak scholar coming down, and raised his hand. "How many people did you bring with you?" "The port charges silver per person, 1 penny per person. Since the boat has a shallow draft, the cargo is not included." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gongzi. Chapter 429. It was just dusk, and there were a lot of people on the pier, including many scholars and ladies returning from outings. When they passed by, they saw the handsome young man in white. Many people were surprised and slowed down to take a look. Far away from the dock, Wang Ruiyang and his entourage had just disembarked. He wanted to come over and talk to Su Buring. When he saw Su Buring disembarking alone, he thought for a moment and stopped where he was. It seemed that he wanted to see Su Buring and a few brave men. What tricks are these ruthless gangsters up to? Su Buring had no expression on his face. He walked up to the 3 men who came to collect cash and spread his hands slightly. "What will happen if I don't give it?" The man in black seemed to rarely meet someone who spoke so arrogantly, and the smile on his face faded a bit. "Young master, don't be ridiculous. It's a rule to pay money when entering Hong Kong. You won't receive much." Don't hurt your friendship just for a small amount of money. Su Buling narrowed his eyes slightly and took a step forward. What's wrong with you? Hey you. The man frowned, held his knife in his hand, and looked up and down. Which family are you from? Are you in charge? After hearing this, the expressions of the two thugs nearby darkened, and they took a step forward with their hands on their waist knives. When Wang Ruiyang saw this scene, he shook his head and snorted softly, and said to the staff next to him. The dignified prince of the feudal lord, engaging in such a trick of pretending to be a pig and eating pigs to compete with the gangsters is really inconsistent with his status. Even if he shows his identity later and scares a few minions, what's the point? The staff next to him stroked his beard and nodded slightly, feeling that Prince Su had had enough to eat and had nothing to do. The man in black at the cash register was obviously offended, his eyes were a little colder, and he raised his hand. You can go east if you don't want to, they don't accept cash there. If I don't get out, what can you do to me? Su Buling glanced at the three of them and walked towards the exit of the port road. The man in black came up angrily, shameless. He raised his hand and grabbed Su Buling's shoulders. Unfortunately, before his hand came into contact with the white scholar's robe, severe pain had already spread from his hand. Looking up, he saw that the tall scholar's hand had grabbed his wrist at some point, and his 5 fingers were like hooks piercing into the flesh, and he forcefully if pinched, the wrist will break directly. Click. Ah! Screams sounded immediately, and the man in black let out a scream. Xiao Qi, who was standing on the deck watching, had slightly frightened eyes. She thought Su Buling would run over to reveal his identity, and then bring out the Daio law to put pressure on Yang Yingxiang, but she didn't expect to hit him directly. She quickly raised her hand to try to stop the housekeeper Hua Jingting, but she didn't expect to see an incredible scene right away. The moment the man in black broke his wrist, the 2 thugs following him yelled angrily, crack, and pulled out the long knife from his waist. Before he could chop it, a cold light flashed in front of him. Su Buling held a single knife and swiped it diagonally across the 2 people's necks. He inserted the waist knife back into the scabbard of the man in black, grabbed his wrist, and looked down at him with cold eyes. The man's scream stopped suddenly, and the blood splashed on the faces of his accomplices on the left and right, and their faces turned pale in an instant. The 2 thugs held their throats and took a few steps away. Their eyes were full of disbelief. They shook twice and fell to the ground at the same time. They twitched slightly. There was a sound of running wind with blood in their throats. The blood slowly seeped into the green ground. Gap between stone slabs. Ah! The surrounding crowd was so frightened that they screamed several times. Xiao Qi was caught off guard. Even though she had a calm temperament, she was also frightened. She looked at Su Buling with wide eyes. She was supported by the maid Lan Hua so that she didn't lose her composure. The great butler Hua Jingting was the guardian door god of the Xiao family in Huainan. He saw a look of surprise in his eyes twice. The surprise was not that he was killed, but that he didn't see clearly how Su Buling drew the sword. Wang Ruiyang, who was watching the show, had a stiff expression, as if he hadn't realized what happened. After all, a few days ago he and Su Buling were drinking at the same table as the Warren. That cynical young man didn't treat human life like an ant at all like he does now. The sudden change shocked the surrounding crowd. 2 Miss Scholars were frightened and fainted. The other thugs stood still and even forgot to come to help. The man in black had his wrist broken, but he didn't dare to shout anymore. He endured the severe pain and gritted his teeth and said, "Hero, spare your life, the little one has eyes but cannot see Mount Tai." Su Bulenling stared into his eyes and said in a cold voice, "The most correct thing you did in your life was not to draw the sword just now. Go back and tell your master that you will evacuate the people here tomorrow. It won't be the same next time." "Yes, I will go back right away to deliver the message." The man in black was sweating profusely and nodded despite the severe pain. On the ship, Xiao Qi finally reacted, with a bit of shock and anger on her brows, and said, Su Buletinling, how can you kill someone in the street? You. Because of a few poems, Su Buling's popularity was very high in Jiangnan, thousands of miles away. Many people also knew that Prince Su went to Jiangnan to propose marriage. As soon as this statement came out, many passers-by were still shocked. When I came back to my senses, I felt a little relieved. After all, according to rumors, this was not the first time that Su Buling had done such a thing. Even the emperor dared to kill people in the street, let alone in Jiangnan. They were just surprised that the prince of the feudal lord, who was rumored to be unparalleled in talent and temper, turned out to be such an elegant-looking scholar. Su Buletinling let go of the man in black's wrist and didn't care about the looks of the people around him. He turned to look at Xiao Qi with calm eyes. If you don't beat it like this, can't you reason with people? Xiao Qi's eyes were slightly surprised. She didn't expect that Su Buling, who was always gentle and elegant, would be so cruel. He killed people directly for just 2 words. How could this be a warning? If you report your identity and warn them, they will retreat. Why do you have to do this? The butler Hua Jingting next to him noticed the confusion of his eldest lady and whispered. Sometimes, if you consider everything too carefully, you will go astray. Su Shizi is the prince of a vassal king. It is enough to have a reason and a legitimate reason. You can't let him negotiate with Yang Yingxiang or report to the authorities. That would be a lowering of status. It is inevitable that he will die if he draws a knife. Only in this way can subordinates not dare to rebel and not let people have a fluke. Xiao Qi is very smart. After a little reminder, she understood it. Thinking about it, it is indeed true. The future Prince Su was offended in the territory of the Prince of Wu. If he was not killed on the spot, would he go and complain to the Prince of Wu? They are all vassal princes. Why should they be inferior to you? Thinking of this, Xiao Qi did not say anything else. After all, she was a woman and rarely saw the scene of killing. She felt uncomfortable and turned back to the cabin to relax. Su Buling glanced at the many thugs who were trembling with fear, and ignored them. He turned around and asked the guards on the ship to clean up the bloodstains of the bodies so as not to disturb Mrs. Liu. Wang Ruiyang, who was standing in the distance and watching, turned a little pale, hesitated, and turned to leave the dock. The staff followed behind and asked softly, Sir, don't you go to contact Su Buling. This man is a lunatic. Let's discuss it again. Looking at the appearance just now, he dared to kill me. The staff considered it, nodded slightly, and said no more. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 430. Thank you to Jita Forever Drop God, the leader of the boss, for the reward. I currently owe a debt, 165/470, and it is estimated that I will owe it until the next book. On the branches of the moon, at the foot of Zhongshan Mountain on the east side of Suanwu Lake, a large-scale luxurious mansion is built. The light of the lights can be seen in the distant Suanwu Lake. There were guards dressed in black patrolling the outside of the mansion day and night. There were as many as 100 thugs there. At first glance, it looked like a small military camp. In the deepest part of the mansion, the sound of strings and bamboos and laughter could be faintly heard, and many drunken guests were hugging each other, laughing and cursing. Being a retainer is a profession that has been passed down since the spring and autumn period. In ancient times, there were Jingke, Maosui, Zuhai, etc., with relatively high social status. However, this retainer mostly refers to the retainers of aristocratic families, and their status is above the threshold. Just like Lao Xiao, Yuzhulu, and Huainan Xiao's Huajing Pavilion, if taken alone and placed in the world, they would be powerful figures in the world. If you can invite these people back to be your right-hand man, your status must be aloof from the world. Only a wealthy family with a long heritage can make these heroes willing to join the family. However, there are too many rich families in the south of the Yangtze River, and it is inevitable that some arty people will appear. They have no background or strength. They have a lot of money and have recruited a lot of people from the world to serve as retainers. The gold content is generally not high. Of course, those who dare to play like this are generally no one will make irresponsible remarks. This is the case with the Jinling Yang family. They are not close to the powerful families, but their financial resources are astonishing. Originally a merchant's family, they were engaged in the shipping business in Jiangnan. Although the family had a strong financial background, they were not ranked among the richest people in Jiangnan. So much so that Mrs. Liu, who grew up in Jinling, had never heard of the Yang family. The Yang family's fortune has only grown in recent years. The sister of the head of the family, Yang Yingxiang, has entered the King of Wu's family. Her beauty have won the favor of the King of Wu, and her family has naturally followed suit. No one in Jiangnan dared not give face to King Wu. Yang Yingxiang relied on this golden sign to expand his business. Casinos, brothels, etc., as long as they could make money, they were involved, and it could be said that they were making money every day. The Liu family and other wealthy people who were once unattainable could exchange cups and cups at the same table. Even the officials respectfully called him Yang Gong when they saw him, and the nickname Yang Bangkong gradually became popular in the market. Anyone with a discerning eye knows whether Yang Yingxiang owns half of Jinling City, but Yang Yingxiang himself seems to have it. Yang Yingxiang has been following the boat racing business since he was a child. He is at the bottom of the scholars, farmers, industry, and merchants and has been looked down upon by scholars and wealthy families. Nowadays, there is no one in Jinling City who doesn't give him face. Occasionally, he writes 2 poems, and those self-proclaimed talents will praise them. He knows that what he writes is nonsense, but so what, as long as everyone praises him, it will be fine. What he enjoys is the feeling of everyone being polite. It's just that tonight, Yang Yingxiang is obviously not in a good mood. This may be the first time since he became rich that he is so angry and has nowhere to vent. In the hall in the middle of the mansion, the paunchy Yang Yingxiang sat on the taishi chair, holding a white jade teacup, listening to what his subordinates were saying. 2 people died on the spot, and they didn't even give them a chance to speak. I tried every means to escape, and even broke one of my hands. The man in black who took the lead on the dock today had gauze wrapped around his wrist and his face was still pale as he told what he had just witnessed. Yang Yingxiang's face turned slightly gloomy and he asked, "Do you want to give me my name?" Those who came with the head of the Xiao family must know Yang Gong's name. The murderer was Prince Su from the northwest. I guess even the Liu family can't afford to offend him. Yang Yingxiang naturally knew that he could not afford to offend him, but he was not frightened. He snorted lightly. He's just a heir apparent, not a vassal king. My brother-in-law is a real prince. Even the emperors today call him cousin. When my sister has a son, with King Wu's favor, she might also be able to become heir apparent. He is a king with a different surname. Prince, how can you compare? The master next to him knew that he was complaining, so he comforted him softly. A skinny camel is bigger than a horse. The prince was conferred by Emperor Xiaozong. There are only 7 in the world. Just 2 worthless scoundrels died. There is no need to care. Yang Yingxiang picked up the teacup, took a sip, and nodded, finally accepting the secret loss. The man in black hesitated for a moment and then said, "Then the young prince asked Mr. Yang to withdraw the manpower from Nanshan port and not collect cash." This. Yang Yingxiang frowned, obviously a little annoyed. The master thought for a moment and then said with a smile, "Prince Su is here to attend King Wu's birthday banquet. If there is a conflict, King Wu will probably be unhappy. How about we stop for a few days and wait until the evil star is gone?" Yang Yingxiang was silent for a moment, slapped the teacup on the table, and said in a deep voice. "That's all, give him some face and stop for a few days." The master and the man in black secretly breathed a sigh of relief, quickly nodded in apology, and retreated. On the south bank of the Wenda Bridge on the Qinhua River, between the white walls and blue tiles, Su Buling and Mrs. Lu walked side by side through the alley between the high walls. Xiao Qi had not yet recovered from Su Buletinling's murderous scene. After getting off the boat, she went to the Xiao family's residence in Jinling to handle matters. Su Buletinling felt that Xiao Qi could resist it, so she did not comfort her, so she dressed lightly and followed Mrs. Lu. Returned to Wenda Bridge. The alley on the south bank of Wenda Bridge has the style of a Jiangnan water town. It is not very wide. The cornices on the white walls on both sides stick out a little. When you occasionally walk past the doorway, you can see two very small stone lions squatting on the ground. Most of them are above the door. There is a stone plaque embedded in it, and it looks ordinary and even a little petty. It is completely different from the red painted gates and vast long streets of Chang'an. If it weren't for Mrs. Lu's introduction, Su Buling would have found it hard to imagine how many families of different sizes have been passed down for hundreds of years in these gates. Those whose ancestors didn't have some reputation seem to be embarrassed to live here. Mrs. Lu grew up in this area when she was young. At this moment, there was obviously some sentimental in her eyes. Seeing that there were no outsiders disturbing the alley, she didn't shy away from being supported by Su Buling's arm, and kept pointing at the objects around her. "See that well? When I was a kid playing hide and seek, I often hid in it. There was a ladder below, which was where I hid during the war. Later, my father beat me up. Your mother and I met there at that time. She was leading a horse to find the door of the Lu family, and she was also wondering why the dignified Jinling Lu family lived in such a remote place." Su Buling actually had this idea, but he didn't say it out loud. He just followed Mrs. Lu to take a walk. The Jinling Lu family ranked second among the Xiao Lu Kui Wang Li, and the family size was not smaller than that of the Xiao family. Most of the fields outside the city belonged to the Lu family. However, unlike the Xiao family, the Lu family is not as extensive as the Xiao family, and they mainly pursue official careers. Lu Cheng'an, one of the 9 ministers, is not favored by the emperor, so he has been a little depressed in recent years. Most of the children in the family study and become officials in various places, and there are not as many people left in Jinling as the Xiao family. As Mrs. Lu walked to the center of the alley, she saw an old woman in her 50s standing at the door. Her appearance vaguely resembled Mrs. Lu, and she smiled and said, "Hongluan is back. Mother." Mrs. Lu quickly pulled her hand away and bowed to her mother, whom she had not seen for many years. Su Buling also bowed quickly, hesitated for a while, and then greeted, "Hello, Aunt." This title was obviously not right. Mrs. Lu frowned and thought about it, but she didn't know what to call her for a while. You can't call her mother grandma, that would be too old-fashioned. Mrs. Lu's mother didn't mind the title. After greeting them twice, she led the two into the mansion. The top nobles who can reach this position generally have impeccable family traditions, and thrift is the basic principle. The Lu family, like the Xiao family, does not have any magnificent decorations. The mansion is very deep. After passing the small door, there are alleys between the courtyards. Occasionally, you can hear the voices of children, and other than that, there is only silence. Su Buling couldn't tell how big this house was, but he walked for a long time without reaching the bottom. It seems that it is not much smaller than the ancestral house of the Xiao family, but the architectural style looks a little small. Following Mrs. Lu, they came to the living room of the Xiao family. The current head of the Lu family was not there. It was Mrs. Lu's brother who came out to receive him. In other words, he was Su Buling's future brother-in-law, but Su Buling didn't have the courage to call him that. He sat quietly beside him and listened. Mrs. Lu missed her hometown very much, but she was the daughter-in-law of the Xiao family after all, and was considered a guest. Except for accompanying her mother to talk about her heart for a while, she still maintained etiquette and rules at other times. It was not until the sky was getting dark that Mrs. Lu finished chatting about the trivial matters in Chang'an and took Su Buling back to the boudoir where she grew up.